was born in 1940, which meant we were in the middle of independence movement in India. We were under British rule, and India became independent in 47. So I was 7 years old when, so I was born as a British subject, but became an Indian citizen in 47. Both my parents were very, very active in the independence movement, which meant that every day, even as a child, we were going to rallies and having discussions, people dropping over, planning what happens next. And so all my memories goes back as a child, even until I left home when I was 20 years old, very active political home. And my parents continued to be active locally in the community as well as statewide, well, we would call province here in Canada. And so I was very much involved in, the very first time I got arrested was with my mother. I was 14 years old. She was protesting in front of the minister's office, one of the minister's office, because they were, I cannot remember and to tell you exactly what the issues were because and what they did, they arrested us, a whole bunch of women and girls, and so it may have something to do with women's rights. And what they did, they couldn't necessarily take us all to jail because we were so many. So they put us in 3 different buses and drove us several miles out, like about 20, 25 miles out of the city, and then said, okay, go on. So we had to walk back or find a way to come home. And so that's my first memory of being active politically with my mother. So it's very easy for me to whenever I hear any kind of a rally or protest or anything, I'm curious to see, is this something I should be supporting, because every weekend there is something happening here now, of course, against what's happening in Palestine. And of course, people have forgotten things have been happening in Yemen and Sudan and all of those places. And so I am quite active politically besides being a social worker. Goes back to my early memories. But I get my BA first. Actually, it was a BSc because the plan was to become a medical doctor. And that's what a lot of middle class families had, the lawyers or doctors or teachers, those were the, and but when I came in 1960, and I went to US first. I was there for about a year before coming to Canada. I didn't like the pre-med courses that I was taking. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to take another degree. And so I got another BA. So I had a BA in psychology and sociology. So that's ended up, but in coming to Canada is another story. I was with 3 friends who went to a movie. And this was in San Antonio, Texas, in 1961, early 61 in the spring. And we went inside, we sat down. Somebody came and said to me, "You cannot sit here." I said, "Why not?" "Because this is only for whites." I had never experienced that before. And I did not even know that that was the law in the US in those days. During the early 60s, only in 62, 63, things began to change, But what upset me more was my classmates. They said, "See you later." They didn't think anything of it. I was so upset, so upset. And I felt, I don't think I want to live here under these conditions. But I didn't know the northern US may be different at that point, But on my way home, I ran into the dean. And she said, "You're upset. What's wrong?" So I told her. And she sat me down and talked for the longest time and said, "You cannot go back because your parents will be so disappointed. Why don't you give Canada a chance?" I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, I just got my PhD from Windsor, Ontario. I think you should try that country before you go back to India." That's how I came to Canada. Is that something? And I am so happy 64 years later, I'm here. Thank God. You know, I really and truly grateful to her for encouraging me to apply. And I got such a reception in 1961 in Windsor because I was the first Commonwealth student in Assumption University. That's what it was before it became University of Windsor. I graduated from University of Windsor, but when I started, it was Assumption. And they were just so thrilled to see a woman in sari able to talk about what's going on in Kerala, which had a communist government. They were so curious about how can you have a democratically elected communist government, you know, all of those sort of stuff. And so I got invitations to speak, you know, the United Church Women's Group, or whether it is a student union, or whether it is all kinds of stuff. And so it was a different, totally different experience of me being a woman of color, someone who has come from another country and really accepted as if that I am okay or I'm special, or in fact, that's what I was made to feel, you know. So I'm grateful to that woman in Dr. Metz, her name, M-E-T-Z, who, who had a degree from Canada, who thought Canada was okay. So I came here, and I've been here ever since. So I got my degree from Windsor, and at that point, again, I didn't know what I should do because I now have 2 undergraduate degrees, right? You know, I wanted to do master's. I was an interest in studying all the time, and so I consulted one of the faculty advisors who suggested that because of my interest in community work and political work, it's a good idea for me to consider social work as a profession. And I may want to go and meet with 3 or 4 people. And so I visited 4 agencies in Windsor to see what do they do and how they do things and whatnot. I was impressed. So that's how come I applied to go to St. Pat's, because the faculty advisor knew a professor at St. Pat's, and he said, that's a good school. You should go there, you know. And so that's where I ended up in 64, and I got my degree in 66, MSW, yeah. And I went back to Windsor to work at the family service. That was my first job, the Catholic family service in Windsor. But most of the work had to do with family counseling, which was okay, but I felt I needed to do something more. So I volunteered to go and work with the United Way if they had some projects, and happened to find someone who was very open to having me over. And I am happy I did that because I went to the poorest area of Windsor. It was called the Droullard Rd. I remember that so well, where women were certainly in trouble. Their kids were thrown out of school because some of them were difficult, and some of them had, you know, addiction problems. The fathers did too. But there was no service. Even the YMCA didn't have any projects in that area. So I was really upset by this, you know. If there isn't any social network for the mothers, or there is no services available, no recreation services available for the young people, I mean, what is going to happen? You know, this neighborhood is going to continue to be in bad shape. But I had read about what's called a community school in Michigan. So I wanted to find out more about what that's all about, and discovered that this is a program by which schools, after the school hours, certain portions of the space is made available to the community groups so they can meet, they can do whatever. So I thought this is a great idea. So I went and chatted with the principal. He was open to it. So I took a group of women, 5 or 6 of them, went to Michigan. It's across the river, right? And learned about what it is all about, and then helped them put together a petition or a report, and we presented that to the city council. They did, and I helped them, and also to the school board. And then they agreed. One of that school in Droullard Rd will open after 3:30 space, not only for the mothers to meet for tea and coffee, and so they can chat about the issues and what they need, what kind of new resources are needed in the community, and also the kids can have access to to do the games and all kinds of stuff. First community school in Canada, done by those women in Droullard Rd with the help of a newly um, um, graduated student. I think it was my second year after graduation. So it's possible for social workers to do not only stuff that you think your employer wants you to do, but open, our eyes to what is really needed in the community. So community service, developing resources in the neighborhood so that the people can identify what their needs are and what they need to create with our support. To me, that is social work. And somebody, I think it would have been probably the director of the School of Social Work, Swithin Bowers was his name. It was he who told us students, I'm going to teach you, loving people, how to love creatively, constructively. And that's a message that always stayed with me, And also, I can remember my parents also saying something similar. It doesn't matter what sort of profession you take on. Your goal in life is to be a social change agent, no matter what you take on. And that is with me still.
That stops in a minute.
That's something going on upstairs. I'm sorry about that.
There's nothing you can do. Just give it a second.
Am I too detailed?
No, it's beautiful. It's
wonderful. Okay. Because sometimes, too many details may not interest people.
I think it's very interesting.
Okay.
I'm curious.
Okay.
So it sounds like the mandate of family services was more, as you said, around the counseling. So how did you make it okay to expand that mandate?
Because of my philosophy, because of what I had learned from my parents and from School of Social Work, it is not simply helping one individual. That individual belongs to a community, a network, not only the family, but also neighbors and all kinds of. So in order for them to make changes in their lives and to feel that they are being productive citizens, they need to be connected to all those community networks. And if the resources are lacking, or if they don't have the ability to develop, either it is childcare, whether it is the parent support services, it doesn't really matter. Whatever stuff that's going on, it's our job to assist them to develop it themselves. So community development to me is very much social work. That's, even though counseling is seen by many people as the primary method of social work, I always saw community development as the way, because to me, strengthening the individuals and their families and the neighborhoods and the larger community, and globally for that matter, is the way to really bring social justice and peace around the world. And so to me, my political values and my social work values, got, they are together. And I think that probably is the reason that I felt that I need to do more. And United Way gave me the opportunity to do that. And I've been active with United Way all along. Even here, I was on the board of the United Way, and I've been acknowledged by them for doing all kinds of work and stuff like that. But to me, that's one of the ways in which we can support the communities and the people in it, and then they feel they're doing the work. They're identifying what the needs are, and then our um, our job is to find resources. whether it is in government or whether it is in, like foundations or United Way, and help them set it up. And that's one of the things that I did after 3 years of graduation. Nova Scotia was calling for people with master's degrees, because they didn't have too many, even though they had a school of social work. It was beginnings of it. Most of the social work graduates are working in Halifax and, largest towns. And so I went to Nova Scotia because I was invited by a friend. Um, and my job was to set up family services in Pictou County in Nova Scotia. I would never have had that opportunity if I continued to live in Ontario. Even though I was active already, I was with Ontario Association of Social Workers and all of those sort of stuff, because there are so many others who have had many experiences and older and who would be asked to do something as important as setting up an agency. But because it was so far away in the rural area, I had the opportunity to do, and thank goodness I responded to it, because that was an experience I'll never forget. Not only that I love Nova Scotia and the people, but also gave me an opportunity to get to know what the real issues are. Again, my first contacts are teachers, principals, lawyers, nurses, a whole bunch of people, to learn about how they view what's going on. And then, of course, part of the job was to find volunteers who would be board members and find people who would help me set up the bylaws and, all of those detailed work one has to do to set up, and of course, finding funds and all of those sort of stuff. So it was a wonderful opportunity. I lived there 5 years. And one of the things I did when I was there as a social worker, I discovered that girls were missing from schools. Guess what? They got pregnant, and the parents sent them away and to the Salvation Army place outside of Halifax. I was so concerned about what impact that has on those young girls, and also the boys who've been connected with these girls, who got pregnant. I just felt we have to do something more. I'm now talking 1970, the we have just soon after birth control methods became legal in Canada. So I joined a group of women, mostly. We formed the first Planned Parenthood in Nova Scotia, and I'm one of the founding members of that, because people needed information. They needed counseling. They needed access to birth control stuff, and also another interesting thing that happened, I think it was in 1969, I could be wrong on the date, a large report came out on rights of women in Canada. But there was no mention of women of color, women who are immigrants. And so I sort of felt, hey, there is an area that I need to be saying something, because I know what it is about. And of course, at that time, I didn't know about what had happened in Nova Scotia, because one of the first things I did to meet with some of the community leaders, including the Black women. And I learned about what happened in Nova Scotia, how I'm trying to think of her name now. We now have a dollar in her name. Um, what is her name?
Portia, no.
Um, isn't that terrible? Can't think of the name. It's a $10 bill. Viola Desmond.
Thank you.
Viola Desmond. Thank you so much. Well, I learned what happened to her. It's the same thing that happened to me a long time ago, and nobody over there thought anything of it. But thank goodness things began to change, as a result of some of the work that those women did. And of course, now we have Wanda Thomas, who is a senator, a social worker, who is doing some wonderful job. In fact, last year, she was the speaker at the Richard B. Splane lecture about slavery in Canada, because not too many people know that we brought people as slaves to Canada as well. And reparation is one of the issues. CASW supports it, you know, and anyway, she was a wonderful speaker. So what I'm saying is that all of this is connected in some way, and I was so happy that I had a chance to work in rural Canada and get to know some of the issues that um, you know, urban people experience and lack of resources and also some of the cultural issues as well, you know, and um, role of women. Um, I started without, I never told this to too many people. In those days, it was impossible. I found that there were 4 of my family clients, kids, were gay, and they didn't have a chance to acknowledge it themselves in an open way, nor to tell their parents or with their friends or any of those. So I thought I'll have a little group session once a week after school. And you know, that's one of the I guess happiest thing that I did, because they really connected with each other because they needed the support, you know, and they couldn't. I mean, I'm talking 1970, 71, 72, you know, in those years, you know. So I was so glad, in spite of living in a very rural sort of a, you know, small townships sort of community where people didn't feel free to discuss even with their own family members. And of course, Canada was not all that great either in those days when it comes to lesbians and gay rights, you know. And so I was able to do things that I may not have been able to do in a city, but but um, but feel that I was really finding out the real nature of some of the social issues that people faced and emotional issues that they faced. And you know, alcoholism was so bad among women in that county. I was so surprised. How in the world do they get the alcohol? Because when I arrived, one of the first thing I did was go to the liquor store and, you know, buy stuff for my apartment. The first day of work, the receptionist says to me, "Oh, we hear you were at the liquor store." How did that happen? "Women don't go to the liquor store here," she told me. Oh my God, I didn't know that. You know, so I'm wondering, how did all the women get their alcohol? Well, they call a taxi. The taxi drivers go and buy them and bring it to them. So I decided to do work with the Addiction Foundation based in Halifax, but they don't have services in Pictou County. And so we did that, you know. That was one of the group of people, you know, and also partners of people who have addiction problems, you know, and then they then joined the AA programs because that's already, you know, and so that kind of stuff that I was able to do, because you get to know everybody and they get to know you, you know, and of course the Trenton, they make the trains there, you know, train, yeah. Well, the workers there, many of them have issues. They don't show up at work, and they get dismissed. So I worked with the labor unions and Family Service. That's the one I created, Family Service of Pictou County. And the labor unions, we jointly set up a committee. And then if there is somebody who is showing these signs and not showing up at work on Monday or taking Friday off, whatever, they'll be referred to my agency, where we will interview the family and try to give them the support instead of getting fired. Well, now you know, all everywhere we have those programs where but in those days those programs didn't exist, and so I had opportunities to do all kinds of new stuff, you know, and be creative and work with variety of people, you know, organizations, and so Nova Scotia gave me a lot of strength and a lot of confidence. And so I felt that I was doing something right, you know, because things were happening. And so that was a wonderful experience. And then from Nova Scotia, I came to BC because a newly elected new democratic government, a social worker by the name Barrett was the premier, Dave Barrett. And so I thought, hey, this is fantastic. We have a social worker as the premier. So And of course, I was invited because of my community development. And I was active with the Nova Scotia Association of Social Workers, a good friend with, um, uh, what's her name? McDonough. She was professor at but Alexa. But before that, she was on the association, active with the association. And I have connections with her family as well, her dad and whatnot. Um, well, maybe I'll boast about this now. In 1972, when the federal election was on, David Lewis was the leader of the NDP. Well, he came to Pictou County to the announcement, his first speech for the election, and it was called corporate welfare bums. He really went after corporations for not paying taxes. And that's where it was held. And I introduced him. And I drove him back to the airport and all of those sort of stuff. So I've been involved with the political stuff for many, many years. And that's part of my parents' history, I think. That's part of it. And to see a social worker as the premier of this province, this is the place to be. So that's why I came to BC, and I've been here ever since. Yeah, yeah.
So what sort of projects did you work on when you arrived in BC in those days? What
Yeah.
was happening?
Yeah, well, one of the things that the BC government was doing at that time is to they took over the public welfare, which is already government service, but the child welfare was given by private agencies, children's aid societies, like you do in Ontario. But the government decided it will be done by government, and then it will be localized. So, what we here in Vancouver, they formed what's called a Vancouver Resources Board. So each neighborhood had a committee of citizens who did a lot of monitoring and policy development and identifying issues and whatnot. And we, the public servants, delivered the services. And so I became supervisor or coordinator of a team in Chinatown area. And that, and then I was there for a few months, and then I was promoted to be in charge of downtown East Side, 4 different offices. And so we did a lot of work in those years. And then the government changed. And so they decided they didn't want to do this locally based services. They wanted to be more amalgamated. And so we lost our chances, unfortunately. And so, but I continued to work in public service, mostly child welfare and public welfare. I like to tell you a story about that, though, because while I was here, I became quite a active person with UBC School of Social Work, and because they placed students with me, and they had a program on community development, but they couldn't find too many people who are keen on taking students uh, who wanted to specialize in community development. And of course, I, as a public servant, it's harder because you're supposed to, deliver services. What the government does not do agitation in the community or organizing the local people to change policies and bring up new programs. Well, of course, we can give advice to our deputy ministers and various people, but it's not the same as coming directly from the community. So I thought it's a great idea to have a couple of students every year in community development. I will do the supervision, and they can do the work outside the offices, and so I did that for many years. But the story that I want to tell you is about a friend of mine who recently passed away just 2 weeks ago, Roop Sibiran. He was a professor of community development. He was one of my closest friends. And so that's why I want to tell that story. Um, I was the president of BCSW in the early 80s, 82 to 84. And then he took over. He became the president after me. Just 2 people of color in all the history of BCSW as presidents. I mean, in this province with the kind of variety that we have here. Anyway, So Roop and I worked very closely together, and he was the professor. So I trusted him totally, and he was very helpful to me, knowing that as a public servant, there are limits to what I'm able to do during the work hours. Afterwards, it's different. Anyway, the two students, I wanted them to do some research about what the real needs are of the people on welfare in the downtown area, in this area. And the way that we thought we'll do it is connecting with the Anglican Cathedral, set up an information service there for people who are on welfare or anybody who needs information about what their rights are and where they can get free food and all of those kind of stuff. And they worked there and set up this information center. Plus, they trained about half a dozen church members who in turn will take over once the students finish their placement. And they wrote a report, and the major theme was homelessness. You know, we're talking about the late 70s and early 90s now, early 80s. Homelessness was the real issue. Some of them had rooms where they lived, but they didn't have any cooking facilities. They didn't have washroom facilities. So, horrible, horrible stuff. And the church community really picked up on it. And do you know that they decided to set up a non-governmental NGO, a housing society? 127 Society is the name. And now they have 380 units. Because the federal government was open to giving money in those days, provincial government was, and city was. And it's all because of what those students did. And Roop was there as a professor, really supporting them when I couldn't during the hours of work. But that's the kind of stuff the students are able to do with the support of those of us who are already practicing, even if our employer may not like the idea that you are really trying to change the social policies and develop new programs and advocate for changes from outside and influence us, those who are working. So we are also able to tell our superiors, this is a serious issue. You have to listen to them, right? So that kind of work, collaborative work with the School of Social Work, with the professional association, and with the neighborhoods, to me is the best way to do social work, when you are a public servant, particularly, and I am so proud to tell you that I'm the only public servant who has received an honor by Spark of BC, the social research and planning for BC, Spark of BC. I was nominated by the Minister of Social Services and my union, BC Government Employees Union. Can you imagine those two people nominating one of their members? I was a public servant, and I was also a member of the union. Only time it has happened, So I'm so proud of the fact that I was successful in bringing people together. It doesn't matter whether they're government, unions always fighting with government, but in this case, they came together to honor one of their members, So there are lots of little things I can tell you. I don't know if this is boring to you, but
it's absolutely inspiring.
So it's interesting that there are ways to do things without really upsetting people, open to listening, open to really understanding what they are going through, and trying to figure out what kind of policy changes are needed, what kind of resources are needed, who has the resources, is it government or is it something? And as a social worker in public service, my approach was, if I am not able to do it, make changes within my own office, or I can't get my superiors to really listen to me about, start a pilot project. Nobody is bothered by a pilot project. They're not, they don't think, well, she's keen and let her do it. And by the time you know, 6 months later or a year later, they're finding the results, you know. And in fact, there are several things I've done as pilot projects that have become government policy, you know. One of which is, I was so upset when I came to Vancouver downtown and I see the Indigenous people, after living in Nova Scotia, working so closely with the Indigenous people there, you know, coming here, seeing everybody, whether it is addiction or whether it is some other stuff, it all to do with the residential school experience as we know today. But in the mid 70s and early 80s, we didn't talk like that, right? But I felt so terrible. There is something wrong. I need to know the real history and the real culture of this group of people. And I took my professional days, because you're supposed to have 1.5 day or something a month or something like that. And so I took a week or 10 days off, went up north, BC, stayed with the Indigenous family. It's a program that was arranged by UBC, actually, the Museum of Anthropology. And I stayed, lived with, and then there was uh, a older woman who took me around and told me what the, you know, the stories and what the um, historical events and what happened to the children and all kinds of her husbands and all of those sort of stuff. And I came back thinking, there's something I ought to do. And so I was able to get 4 or 5 leaders, community leaders, older people, Indigenous people, got them to agree that before my team apprehend a child, what we would like is for that family to have a visit with one of them and talk about what's going on, what needs to be done. And do you know that happened? We set up what's called in those called Native Indian Child Welfare Society, you know, because that's how we used to call Native Indian. And so within 8 months, the number of kids came into care went down 50% because these families who were really stressed out, they were able to trust their elders and able to tell them the real story of what's going on. They would never say that to our social workers because they were frightened we will take the kids away, right? And then they will find a relative, either an uncle or a cousin or somebody who they could stay with for a few days or separate the husband who is drinking and abusing her and get him to go and stay with somebody. Whatever that they decided was the best for the family for the next 2 or 3 months, you know? And that's what we did. And out of that experience, the government of the day, the deputy minister of the day, was convinced that we need to be involving First Nations community in child welfare matters. I know they will never give credit to the small group of social workers working downtown East Side who did this under my supervision, because that's not how it is done. You know, we are public servants and we do our work. But I'm so proud of the fact that really created an openness within government people, public servants, as well as politicians, that it's important to involve the First Nations in any decisions that we make about child protection, child welfare. And about a year and a half later, we did set up a contract with the First Nations community here to do that work, you know. But the beginnings of that had to do with that kind of stuff that we did. As these were volunteers, we didn't have money to give them because there was no other than petty cash, you know. So I gave them money to have lunch or something, you know. There was nothing available. But those elders were so committed to their own families and wanted to help. Some of us they trusted, you know, and so that was one of the ways in which that I feel that public servants can do things through pilot projects. As soon as you say it's a pilot project, you know, nobody is nervous, you know. And so I recommend people who are trying to make changes and they feel they don't have support for taking the risk, use the expression, I'm just going to do a pilot project, you know, and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Are there some other examples of the policy change that you'd like to share with us that you talked about?
Well, there are a whole bunch of stuff, but part of it has to do with how you work within, and with who, and so it's not just as public servants or as an employee of an agency, but I think it has to do with the relations that you have developed with the various community groups, neighborhood groups, or even other professional groups. For example, um, well, I guess one of my one of my work that really makes me feel very good about is during the early 80s, 83, the government at the time decided that they will bring in a budget that's going to really get rid of practically everything that we considered important social policy stuff. And of course, the unions were very upset because many of us were given notice, including me, of end of, I think I was given 8 months or 12, 11 months or something, that my job will be gone. And so the unions began to be active. But a social worker, Renata Shearer, she was a human rights commissioner. And of course, the provincial government got rid of the Human Rights Commission as well. And of course, she and a whole bunch of others began to organize against the government. And even though I was a public servant, I took a leave of absence without pay. And I went to work for the BC Federation of Labor. They hired me, I should say, to be one of the 3 organizers in the province to organize rallies and any kind of discussions about the impact of what the government is doing. And it was called the Solidarity Coalition. It became quite well known across because Canada and overseas too. Even I had people from New York and various other places call to find out what we're doing and how we're doing and whatnot. And there was a book that was written about it, and I mentioned in it quite a bit as well. And I have a story. In fact, he has reported that story. I went to Prince George because I was the past president of BC Association of Social Workers, and so knew the social work community in the province. But here I am, staff of Solidarity Coalition. I'm supposed to be contact with all the unions, try to organize rallies and discussions and whatnot, and also media contact and whatnot. The only contact I had was with the BCTF, BC Teachers Federation, but none of the private, particularly the forestry industry. I had no connection whatsoever. And of course, that's a large number of people in the Prince George area. And so I went there trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I connect with these people? And so I asked people, where are those people? Where do they socialize? Well, they go to this hotel bar and they go to that bar, and okay. So I decided after work, when they are at the bar, that's where I'm going to go. Now, in '83, not too many women of Indian background, like South Asian woman, alone walks into a bar and talks to the men. Okay, but I did it because I'm so convinced that we need to get these guys, to come. So I would just go and say, well, I'm so and so. I'm representing Solidarity Coalition, and I'm from Vancouver, and I don't know too many people here. So I've come to tell you about this big plan we have. Tomorrow we're having a rally, or day after tomorrow, whatever. The BCTF is involved, and BCASW is involved, and do you know that's what I did? And I just find, how did I get the courage to do it? I think it's a conviction, isn't it? It's the philosophy. It's that philosophy that you're a social change agent. It doesn't matter what job you're doing. So you use those opportunities to be, So that's the kind of work I did. And of course, in the long run, Solidarity Coalition didn't really get what we were looking for, even though some of the jobs came back, including mine. So, so what I'm saying is that it's, it isn't that you plan, this is what I'm going to do. In my case, things just come my way and I'm open to it. And as long as you're connected to, uh, the community and knows what the issues are, opportunities come. And then whatever talents you have, you use it, or bring people who have the knowledge and the talents to work with you. And students were always my favorite people, because one of the other stories that I have to tell you, there is just about a block away, there is a huge BC Place, which is a stadium. Now, in that area, there used to be single room hotels where a lot of poor people lived, single men who are on welfare. Well, they were getting rid of all of them because the government of the day wanted to have the stadium. Okay, I had a student in community development. He went around interviewing all those people, asking them, what's going to happen to you? What are your plans? Well, some of them had to go all the way to Surrey or to Abbotsford to find reasonable places on welfare to live, because they don't have these single rooms like they do downtown Vancouver. And they were upset. Some of them were really, really upset. Anyway, he wrote up the story, his research, he came up. And of course, I cannot do anything because I'm in charge of public welfare, administering public welfare, right? But Roop Sebren was very helpful. And the student, I went to First United Church and asked whether we can have a meeting there, whether they will open up, they will sponsor a meeting when the student is going to give this report of what he has found, anyway. And that happened. And that meeting, the student made the presentation. Out of that came a group of really fighting to change things in the downtown area, so that there's not going to be this huge highway behind the stadium. And also, the stadium is not going to be called Bill Bennett Stadium. It is going to be called BC Place Stadium, because it's paid for by the people of BC, and work of a student, placed in my office, public welfare. It's possible, as long as you are clear about, about really practicing your code of ethics. That if there is something confidential that's given to me as a policy matter in government, it's not my role to publicize it. It's the government, the politicians, the legislatures. They are the ones who make that decision. And as a social worker, I had to be careful about the code of ethics as well. And the same as we don't share confidential information about our clients, right? And without the consent and all of that sort of stuff. And when there was some sort of a protest rally, and what happens, it is in the afternoon or not on a weekend, what I used to do, I put it in writing to my immediate boss, I'm taking 2 hours off without pay. And then I go and do it. So there is a record of it. Actually, one of the deputy ministers this is some years ago, didn't trust what I was doing. And they thought that I was working too closely with downtown East Side protesters and whatnot, And they had an investigation on me, but they found nothing, Because, as I say, I'm a social worker, so I follow my code of ethics, But I don't give them reasons to think that I'm breaking the law. But I encourage others to do the research, come up with information, and develop policies based on that information, involve other people, and then I will certainly take a report and share it with my superiors, just as people in the community get it, because information is important for us. And so there are a whole bunch of stuff like that one can do, without really getting fired. Because there's no point in getting fired, because you can't do the job anymore, right? So how do you do that without getting fired is the trick. And I think most of us in social work know how to do that because that's part of our training, I think, because we are social change agents, and that's what it's all about. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what was the environment for you being a social change agent and even being under investigation?
Yeah.
What were some of the relationships to your colleagues or your supervisors?
Oh my goodness. I never felt alone. In my case, when things were happening, they were all in support of me. One of the things I remember, when somebody is denied public welfare, they have the right to appeal. But I found that many of those people didn't know who to go to, So I thought I will set up, a group of people trained in what the policies are and all of that sort of stuff. But I worked with a group of retired teachers, actually, a group of teachers, because I thought they would be good people to volunteer as well. Now that got me in trouble because they thought that I was helping to set up, it should be done by the client's community. But our clients here don't have that kind of connections, so, but people came to my rescue because they were saying all I was doing is teaching people what the policies are, what the rights of the clients are, not asking them to vote in favor of the client, So it really, I didn't break any rules, So there are people, and of course, they get to know me, and I'm also on the weekend, and having been the president of BCSW, people knew me as well, and stuff like that. So there are lots of connections that I have with a variety of social service organizations. One of the groups that I closely worked with is the immigrant women's community, because in those days, in the late 70s and 80s, do you recognize that person? Rosemary Brown, another social worker, close friend. We love going to the opera. That is our. So we fly to San Francisco, or we fly to New York but she experienced a lot of racism, including, it's in her book actually, including the fact when she was grocery shopping, somebody would come and ask her, how do you cook that, whatever it is that she picked up? And so she would give a simple recipe, and then she walk away. When the person comes back, say, are you available for housework? And this is a woman who is like the first Black woman to get elected in Canada in the provincial legislature, Rosemary Brown. There she goes. I mean, can you imagine? So that kind of racism. And also, we were working very closely with the women's community here, but that the white women who were fighting for the rights, whether for better salary or better recognition, or to be on the board of directors of companies, or to be the executive director or whatever, they had no sense of what the women of color or the immigrant and refugee women were experiencing at that time, because they were so conscious that they were so concerned about what's happening in the whole business community more than anything else. And I remember Rosemary challenging them. When you're doing this, who's looking after your children? They're mostly Filipinos, South Asians, and they're not even getting, minimum wage. So we had to organize our own group. So I was one of the ones who started a national immigrant visible minority women's organization, because we felt it's very important for us to work on some of those stuff, to not only come together as a group, but also to get the women and the government to recognize that there are some stuff that they're missing. Okay. And one of them happened to be, if you can believe this, one of them happened to be federal government gave free English lessons to new immigrant men, but not to women. This is before your time. So we thought, hey, just a minute. These mothers are the ones who are bringing up those kids in the school, and before they go to grade 1 or preschool or whatever, they need to know a little bit of English. Otherwise, they're going to be competing with those kids, you know. The mothers need to know English so that they can teach their kids. And also, fathers are not the only breadwinners, you know. So we worked on that, and it got changed. Things like that, you know, turned around. I must say, I was really pleased that the government of BC, that was again an NDP government, appointed a panel of people, including 3 of our social workers, and there are others as well, to review the child welfare policy, child welfare legislation in this province. So we traveled around, and we had 2 First Nations people in it as well. They had their own report. I have the report there that if in case you want to have to look at it. And part of that report was about community development as a government a program, that it's very important to take that approach in developing services and really meeting the real needs of the people in the local neighborhoods, you know. And at the end of that, they came up with a new legislation, child welfare legislation, based on our report. And I was invited by the Minister of Social Services to be consultant coordinator of community development within the province of BC. I said two conditions. One, I continue to live in Vancouver because I didn't want to be in Victoria in the middle of, you know, everything, total control. But the other is I need 25 new positions. And I got it. So we had people in various regions of BC, a community development worker within Family and Children Services, and I did their supervision or consultation and that sort of stuff. Then again, government changes, things change. That's one of what happens in democratic societies, right? You know, so I certainly was so pleased that I was able to do that work as a consultant to the government as a community development consultant. And then once that got changed, the government appointed me to be the director of multiculturalism and anti-racism program for the province here. Well, in those days, federal government contracted with the provincial government to administer immigrant settlement services. So we were administering the immigrant settlement services as well as multiculturalism because we have a legislation. So I was the director of that until again a change of government happened and they got rid of that as well. Now, the Human Rights Commission is back, and you know, so some of those things are back again because we now have a EB as our premier, who is from Kitchener-Waterloo originally, and human rights lawyer, and so you know, things are happening a little bit better compared to how it was, and so I retired at the end of that as the director of multiculturalism and racism programs. You know, one of the things that I did, and I'm so proud of, and I wanted to share that with you, is that I hired a First Nations a lawyer to go around the province, outside the urban area, talk with the First Nations families and communities to see what are some of the racism issues that they would like us to look at. And so she came back with a report. It was unbelievable. Some of the women were saying they got beaten up or they were threatened by their husbands or somebody or uncle or whoever. They go to the police. The police don't listen to them. The police say, oh, he was drunk. Just give him a couple of days. He'll be all right, you know. So they don't take a report, and they even don't take them seriously of this, you know. I was so upset listening to it. How can a police do that to women when they are there saying that our lives are threatened? So out of that report came the idea that I then talked with the Human Rights Commissioner at the time, we had one, and the two of us really got the RCMP, Ministry of uh, Attorney General, whole bunch of people together. And out of that work came the first hate crime team in Canada. Part of the work is to educate these police officers all over about what hate crime is. You know, it's unbelievable. You know, and thank goodness that that First Nations woman did the work, because if I had sent a white woman or Indo-Canadian woman, we may not have gotten that kind of report. You know, because those women wouldn't trust. They don't have the kind of a relationship with our communities. We are settlers, right? And so thank goodness. And you know, one good thing that happened out of that experience, the same First Nations lawyer, I learned many years later, 3 years later, she nominated me to get the Order of Canada. Isn't that wonderful? I get so emotional whenever I talk about it, because as a settler, you know, knowing that a First Nations woman thought that I was doing the right thing to the point of getting a recognition, and that she, without telling me, talking to me, because she worked with me, she knew my background, you know, and had access because I had hired her. She somehow must have talked to other people to get my resume and whatnot, right? You know, and then what happened? The year that I got it, the Governor General happens to be a refugee who came to this country. You know, I have a photo of the two of us together. So this is Canada for you. Yeah, I'm emotional. Yeah, yeah. So I'm very proud of some of the projects and stuff that I took on that has made a difference in the lives of people, and of course, in my life as well. And I'm the only social worker in all of Canada who got invited by the Peace and Reconciliation Commission to be an honorary witness. And you know what? I talked about the strength of the women, Indigenous women, which I knew, I experienced, I saw it happen. Without them, those communities will not survive, even though it's not recognized. The matriarchal societies are no longer recognized as matriarchal societies. But those women still do the work. And that's what I talked about. And of course, I talked about racism. That was, you know, the real serious issue, right? And thank goodness, in the final report, they included my statement about racism and the strength of women, because I think they liked hearing that, you know, because this, I think there were 80 or 90 people who were invited across Canada to give honorary witness. And I looked at all the names, and I only saw me as the only social worker. So I felt proud of the fact that our profession was represented in those hearings, you know. I'm sorry I'm crying, but
Very beautiful.
it's emotional. Yeah.
You have also won the Order of British Columbia.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Would you tell us about that?
Well, that's part of because of the work that I did in BC, and particularly with the immigrant and refugee communities. When I was working in Chinatown, I was the when I was I walked into the office. The office was already there. The receptionist was a white woman who doesn't speak Mandarin or Cantonese. How can we have an office in Chinatown without the receptionist speaking Cantonese? Most people spoke Cantonese. So no wonder they don't come for service. They don't feel comfortable. They don't know who to talk to, right? You know. So that was one of the first jobs I had to do, you know. And also because of the fact that I'm, as an immigrant woman, and knowing about what's going on in the immigrant women's community, it was very important to have services, you know. So my immediate supervisor, I'm so lucky I have so many women social work supervisors or friends who have done so well. Margaret Mitchell, again from Ontario. I don't, she went to University of Toronto for her social work. And she is the one who really connected me to Jane Addams, because after her degree, she worked in the settlement services, which is what Jane Addams did in Chicago, right? And Margaret Mitchell was my immediate supervisor in Chinatown. And she gave me time off to, well, take the company time to go and help set up services for immigrant settlement services, for immigrant refugee women. So a group of us started it. In my volunteer capacity, I became the president of Pacific Immigrant Resources Society. It's 50 some years later, still functioning, doing very well. But Margaret Mitchell got fired by the government as well. And she went on to politics. She became a member of parliament. Um, and she's the one who spoke in the House of Commons when she was reporting on wife battering in those days. That's how we used to describe wife battering. The men laughed because they thought that was funny, a report on a wife battering. I think it's because there was some talk about uh, problems with Pierre Trudeau and his wife in those days. And so maybe they were nervous, when they heard about wife battering and not knowing what Margaret is going to come up with again or whatever. I don't know. We're just guessing. Well, everybody laughed. The community across Canada, the women's community, got so angry because Margaret said, "It is not a laughing matter, Mr. Speaker," and that became the theme. It's not a laughing matter. And Margaret wrote a book, actually, her own life story, and it's called It's Not a Laughing Matter. And she was my supervisor, and my friend, And of course, when she was in politics, I worked with her as her communications person very closely. But what happened is that she gave me time to do that. So PIRS, became an agency, And the other woman I mentioned, Shearer, Renata Shearer, she was working for YWCA. And from there, she went to work for City Hall as a social planner. She's the one who started Mosaic, ISS, Immigrant Settlement Services, all of those. So us social workers have contributed a lot. And so I was part of all of that group of people working. And so Rosemary Brown actually nominated me to get and Explain. It was a joint nomination to get the Order of BC. They didn't tell me. Only when I got the call that I learned, and I went after them asking who did it, which one of you did it. So I learned it was a joint project by Dick Splane, and so I'm so happy that I'm honoring Dick Splane all these years, and tonight happens to be the 17th year of Splane Lecture on Social Policy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Dick Splane was so good to me because one of the things he did is connect me to ICSW, International Council on Social Welfare. And I became Canadian president at one time, long, long ago. So used to travel to all the international conferences, whether in Morocco or in Berlin or in Tokyo or whatever. And sometimes we'll make presentation together, and so he gave me confidence to do that kind of stuff, and so yeah, so that's why I think I support the young people, the young students, because I think because all these role models that I have, they were so good to me and helped me to be who I am. And so it's important for me to give back. We have to leave this place better than we found it, right? I don't know who said that, but somebody did. And of course, as I said, social change agent, that is our goal. Yeah, yeah. So anyway.
So, since you've retired, have you continued to do?
Oh,
You
yeah.
mentioned a few things to us, but maybe there are other things that you've continued
Oh,
to
yeah,
do
I
since
still
before.
do. Well, I retired when I turned 60 because I felt and particularly since there was a government that was not, you know, I supported. And also I love traveling. I've traveled most of the countries. Maybe I just have maybe about 30 countries that I have not gone to, and also with the international conferences and stuff, and also with ICSW, we used to have a program whereby we would sponsor social workers from Global South to come to Canada. And so they would stay with me for 3 weeks or a month or whatever. And then I would arrange whatever program they were interested in, if whether it is services to the seniors or whether it is something else. And so I have made connections because people have come and stayed with me. They're always asking me to come and stay with them. And so I have people all over the world that I can go to. Anyway, so I enjoy traveling very much and meeting people. And I travel alone as well. I don't go with a group. Um, but anyway, and of course, um, after uh, the day they had a party for me, Dick Splane came to me and said, "I have a job for you." And I said, "No, Dick, I'm not taking a job. I'm retiring." He said, "No, no, no, this is a volunteer job." "Oh, what is it?" "Well, the United Nations Association in Vancouver is really in trouble. They have $20,000 deficit. I like you to join the board and do something about it." Well, how can I say no to Dick, right? So I did. And of course, I became very active and I continued to be an honorary board member and do all kinds of projects. We have several projects. Dick Splane is one of the lecture is one of those that we do. And of course, we now have a nice amount of money in our bank as well. So we are able to do things. And most of the work that we do are really to connect young people to UN issues, and teach them, and trying to get people to, and also to connect them with the local agencies that are doing local work but with a global perspective, like Amnesty International, Crossroads, and no Red Cross, a whole bunch of organizations, and those the young people have opportunities not only to volunteer but also career plans. And then I also served on the board of directors of Crossroads International, and for a number of years. But I guess you already know because one of you contacted Stephen Lewis Foundation. Stephen Lewis family is very close to me, and when I was a student in Ontario, Windsor, I got involved, with what was going on in those days, and so Stephen was very active, and so was his father, and also Kay McPherson, Voice of Women. I don't know whether you know Kay McPherson from Toronto. She's no longer alive. Started this organization called Voice of Women, again a peace movement, and so I'm actually um, uh, Stephen actually called me and asked whether I would be part of 3 or 4 of us starting a foundation because he needed to. Canadians were sending checks to him, asking him to help the families, groups in East Africa, HIV/AIDS in the mid-80s. He was a UN uh, ambassador, and he cannot take money. So we needed to set up something, an NGO. So that's how, and if I registered in BC first, it's now a national, but it's easy to register here. We only need 3 people, to sign. So I became the secretary treasurer. I'm still on their as an honorary board member and very active with them. And one of the projects that I really and truly support is grandmothers movement. The grandmothers in BC, we have 30 some groups of grandmothers. Across Canada, we have over 200. Those grandmothers raise funds for the grandmothers in Africa who are looking after the children because their parents are gone due to AIDS and whatnot. And of course, those women are now working together, and they're the ones who are fighting against polygamy and all kinds of stuff that are important to those women. So Stephen Lewis Foundation is doing a fantastic job, and I'm so proud of the fact that I was part of the beginning of that organization and continue to be in support. And then, of course, I mentioned to you, I'm very, very active at the moment with WILF Canada as a co-president, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and trying to organize a peace rally in Ottawa at the end of the month of May. And we will have both from Halifax and from Vancouver vans going, and we'll do teach-ins or talks or that sort of stuff along the way, because working for peace, working against war, trying to get women involved in those discussions when they talk about diplomacy, mostly done by men. And so it's very important for us. And that's what Jane Addams wanted. And that's why Jane Addams got the Nobel Peace Prize. The only social worker I know who was our leader in North America. And so I'm so proud to be following her footsteps.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any questions?
Yeah. You have been the founder, have developed so many programs, organizations, and social policies. How did you do that? What informed that work, or what prepared you to be so foundational in building so much?
Always working with others. You don't do those things alone. It has to be a collective approach. And you work with people, not only those who agree with you, but also those who do not. Because it's very important to hear their views and understand what's causing their view and how it can be changed. And so I think you have to be open-minded, but work collectively. That would be my approach. That has been my approach, because I didn't do any of this on my own. I may get an idea, or I may have a tea with somebody who may create this idea, but is not interested in following up or taking it up. But we will work together or bring maybe 3 or 4 more people. One of the things I used to do when, this is again in the late 70s and early 80s, I'm a wonderful cook. I love cooking. And I can make things from, many parts of the world. And I would make a dinner, and I will have a handful of people come. Rosemary Brown was the one who helped me with it. So she would say, okay, she was an MLA at that time. She would say, okay, let's make sure Margaret Mitchell is there. She was the member of parliament, right? Let's make sure the director of social planning is there. Let's make sure, so there are people that we can influence, that they have issues they want to influence, but it was done in somebody private home. And so we used to have, it's like the old times in France, how they used to have these gatherings, and I can't remember the salons. It was more like that, and so there will be new people sometimes. So they're meeting the member of parliament, they're meeting, and privately they're able to tell them what they have to say and what their issues are. So it became a place where people sort of look to, well, let's ask Patsy to pull together something. And I think it's because I was a good cook. That helped, to having the food. I was going to give you some tea and stuff, but you guys don't want any tea, so there you go. So it's my sociable nature that helped to do this sort of stuff, And I happened to have a house where it was a large house that I was able to do those kind of stuff. I still do it, but it's limited what I can do in a condo, right? Yeah, yeah. So I think, going back to your question, you never do things on your own. You're not that brilliant, nor do you have the resources. You have to work collectively. And so you have to work with a group who are like-minded, have similar values and experiences, and really committed to change, social change, And then, but do not neglect those who don't agree with you. Somehow we have to figure out a way to connect with them and hear what they have to say, but maybe informally, not necessarily confronting way. Yeah, that has worked. I think it works for everybody. Yeah.
And What's changed in your work, in the past 40 years in terms of
Well, in my own work, I started out as a family counselor, and I now have become a community development person, a political activist, a peace activist. Those are the kind of stuff that people uh, refer me as. I don't think that they would see me sitting with somebody doing the kind of early stuff that I did. So I think what has happened to me is that in addition, or started out working with the individual families, it became a group, it became larger community, and it became more the larger society. And now it has become a global stuff. So, you know, uh, wear buttons about Palestine and go and participate, give speeches. In fact, I spoke 2 or 3 places at the rallies when those medical people were all getting killed. The Vancouver General Hospital staff, they came for a protest rally just outside of City Hall. So I went and spoke because I worked in a hospital. I started out, my practicum was at Neurological Institute in Montreal, and and um, and so I felt really connected to those people, and so I take any opportunity to promote the idea, and I always tell them I'm a social worker because I think it's important to really feel proud of your profession, and and support others, and they think highly of you when you are open, and hearing what they have to say. Yeah.
yeah. And can you speak more to what drew you to work with the provincial associations? Because it seems like you worked with Ontario, Nova Scotia, and then eventually as the president of the BC Association of Social Workers. What drew you to work with the association?
Well, I started when I was in Windsor as a first year. There was a branch of Ontario Association of Social Workers, and I think it came out of what I learned at the university. They encouraged because the meeting that told you, Dick Splane came to speak to us about Canada Assistance Plan, which was being planned at that time. It was sponsored by the Ontario Association of Social Workers in Ottawa. So I got, I found out there is such thing, a group of, and of course they are the ones who can demand and for policy stuff. And when I was here as the president, we started a committee on anti-racism. uh, BCSW is still functioning, because we have a lot of work to do, long way to go. Yeah, and I think it came out of the school. I think they encouraged me to to uh, to learn about the Association of Social Workers, and out of that came not only the provincial, but also I sat on the CASW board representing BC, and also representing Nova Scotia when I was there. Um, then, of course, with the international, I've attended several of their conferences, um, biannual conferences by the International Council, and not only ICSW but also International Federation of Social Workers. Yeah, so yeah, yeah. It gives you opportunities to meet other workers, whether other social workers, and learn about what's going on and what the issues are and how they're approaching certain things in Brazil versus Congo is versus Kenya, whatever. Yeah, yeah. I tell another story. I don't know if you have time.
Yes, lovely. That's great. If you have time, we have time.
Okay. When I was a student in the U.S., um, that was in Kansas. I was there one semester. And then I went back to Kansas City in the summer. My roommate was a black woman from Kenya. At the time, neither of us thought anything of it, but we were the only two who were people of color in that college, Mount Saint Scholastica College. Anyway, she went on to go to Columbia to do her um, master's degree. No, she stayed there and finished a BA and then went to Columbia to do masters. I went to Texas, and that's where the horrible stuff happened to me, and I came to Canada. But we kept in touch. Okay. After her master's degree, she went back to teach at the university in Kenya, in Nairobi, and then she went into politics. But during all of this period, she also started an organization to involve women to plant trees. Green Belt Movement, it's called. And it became such a huge phenomenon because of the kind of uh, uh, you know, inspiration that she gave to the ordinary women because they had a job, they're planting trees, because Africa, they were cutting down everything and horrible stuff were happening. Okay. And of course, I would go and visit, I would plant trees with her, you know. And in fact, I took some friends from here, social work friends, and we planted trees together, you know, all of that sort of stuff. She was the first Black woman from Africa to get the Nobel Peace Prize for environmental work. Usually, in climate work, you know, it's not considered peace. It's mostly around war. She got it for the first time. Wangari Maathai was my roommate. I have a photo of her. She used to come to New York all the time, so I would go and we would spend time together. And she was well, just before she died, she had cancer. She and I were born same year. She was born in April, and I'm in August 1940. And she was in Seattle, the University of Washington invited her to come. So I took some friends and went over there. So I took some photos of her. I'll show it to you. I'm so proud of her, you know. And when I went to Norway, they have a museum of, in Oslo, they have a museum of people who have gotten the Nobel prizes. And to see her face, I started to cry. It was so neat. We started as young people, you know, and advice she used to give me, you know, and I think she had some influence on me because she grew up in Africa under British rule, but they were not as how do I say, openly critical of British government as my father and my mother were, you know. So I got this talent to be open about what I thought. For example, when one of the discussions in the US, I was a foreign student, right? Something happened, serious happened in Africa. There was plane went down, and the president of the country went down with it. So the professor made mention of it. So I said, did CIA have anything to do with it? She was angry. She said, you are a foreigner. You don't talk about our institutions that way. And and Wangari took me aside, said, Patsy, you have to be careful. You don't attack. It came across as an attack, even though you were sort of being sarcastic. You know, you believed it was CIA behind it, but they don't acknowledge those things, nor do they want to hear it from those of us who are foreigners. So soften how you do it, you know. So that's something, now that we are talking about it, tells me maybe that was a help. Yeah, but of course, social work profession helped me as well, you know, when you study how to work with people, right? You know, yeah, yeah.
You've talked a lot about mentors and people who have assisted you, and you've been the mentor to many people, it sounds like, along the way. Um, any particular skills or um, approaches that you use when you're in a mentoring role?
Well, I guess they have to recognize what their own skills are. What is it that their goals in life, their ambitions, and then support them to get it. But I think those folks have to recognize first what they want to do, what they, you know, and if they are not ready, they don't have that yet, help them figure it out. And so, what interests them, is it music, or is it reading, or is it talking to people, going out for lectures, or watching movies about, documentaries and all of those sort of stuff. And you learn about whatever topic that interests them. And so, and then help them, connect to them with people who are in the community, who may be a professor, or who could be a community leader, or so open doors, support open doors for them so that they get connected and feel confident and able to do things, and they get invited to do things with them and stuff like that. I mean, these are simple things. I don't think that there is any, uh, big uh, stuff that I can tell you about. It seems to me that that's what I usually do. I usually connect people with others, just like I got connected, and very often, have supper together, or go to a show together, go to a symphony together, or something like that. And so they get introduced to me and my interests, as well as who are my friends. And so you develop, and or if their interest is totally different from what I'm doing, I may find out, hey, do you know so and so, or do you know a lawyer who may be interested in this sort of advocacy work? And so I like to connect to them, and stuff. That's where Mubina Jaffer, she's a senator. She's a liberal senator, but she's my sister, really and truly. We're very close. In fact, she's hosting me when I'm in Ottawa, and I'm taking a young woman with me too, because she can't afford to go, so I'm sponsoring her. So both of us will stay at Mubina's place. Mubina, we're part of this immigrant refugee women group that I talked to you about earlier. And so we've remained friends. And of course, having a couple of senators, or 3 or 4 of them that I know, it's easy. All you have to do, hey, what do you know? Who do you know? I like to connect to this young person with so and so, or somebody. So those kind of, you use every opportunity what you have, and I think personal connection certainly is the best way. And so they sort of see you as someone interested in them, and so they will open up, and they will tell you, well, I'm a little nervous about giving a speech. And I say, well, let's then sit down and um, write it out. What are some of the themes that you want to, or and then maybe we'll put a draft together, or you put a draft together and I look at it, and that kind of simple ways of helping somebody to feel confident and take their chances. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not an academic to tell you in words that are going to be, appealing to you, but that's what I do.
I have asked folks, sort of as a wrap-up question,
Sure.
if you were going to give some advice to a budding social worker who wanted to be an innovator and a change maker like yourself, what advice would you give them?
Never think you don't have the ability. Never, never give up the idea that your life's goal, social change. Connect with as many people as possible so that you're not alone, working together for social change, not only locally, but also globally. Yeah.
And are there any final thoughts or final stories you would like to
Well, I
share?
just want to thank you folks for doing this recording and this particular project, because I think it comes in handy for a lot of people to get to know individually, some of us who have been doing work for a long time, and to have a record of it. And so I really thank McMaster University for doing this. And as I say, it's ironic that we're doing it on a day when I'm celebrating one of your graduates, Richard Splane. It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. No, I don't have anything to say, but I really want to thank you folks, both of you, and hopefully keep in touch. And yeah, yeah.